I want to know exactly like what steps did your mother take? Do you remember those steps that she took to start her own agency? How much have you seen has been like the typical costs that new agency owners incur within the first 3 to 6 months of doing business?
I need to communicate to anybody who's looking to make the transition from the bedside to the boardroom to know that it's going to take you a lot of hours. It's not going to be an easy march to the seven-figure mark.
You know who you remind me of? You're like the Alex Hormozi of the medical staffing world. What is up, guys? Jason here. Welcome back to the channel and our series, Nurses to Riches, The Road to Fire. If you've ever wanted to start your own medical staffing agency, this episode is going to blow you away. I am going to be speaking with our wealthiest guest yet. This year, he will generate $13 million in annual revenue, but at his current trajectory, his company should break $100 million within 5 years. And I should also mention that he started investing in real estate in Italy, where he was able to purchase investment properties for as low as €1. But make sure you watch the entire video and let us know at the end if you want him to return so he can talk with us about his real estate portfolio. So with that said, Karl, let us know a little bit about yourself and what it is that you're currently doing for a living.
That's always a tricky question because I do quite a bit for a living. But my main businesses are home health care and medical staffing, and that's kind of evolved into a tech company and also a real estate investment firm. So as of today, we own and operate 4 medical staffing and home care agencies. That's what the portfolio is. We are looking to add a 5th company. Hopefully all goes well and we're able to close on that. We do just under $13 million in annual revenue across those companies. And if we add this next one, that will take us to about $22 million in annual rev, with the goal being to clear $100 million in annual home health care and medical staffing revenue in the next 5 years. So yeah, I would say what I do is I own and operate home care and medical staffing agencies.
Wow. Okay, so if people have been watching us for a long time, they would know that you are probably the most successful guest I've had on the show thus far. But I want to know, how did you start out and what brought you to this point?
I was fortunate enough to have an entrepreneurial mom. She's the one that started the medical staffing company. So back in 1996, she actually saw one of the invoices from another nursing agency, and it was like, what? This is how much they're paying? I need to set up one of these companies myself. But my mom has really awful computer skills. She's a nurse from 1983. So they all don't really have computer skills. If you've been working with nurses, you know. So by default, I became her assistant because I was the kid in the house that cared enough about the business and cared enough about using a computer to really be functional in that business. But I ended up expanding the business in 2001 when I went to college, expanding it into Nassau and Suffolk County because we were only servicing New York City. And as I was studying the radiological sciences, I went to school for health technology and management with a concentration in radiological studies. So that was X-ray, CT, and MRI. I was also running this expansion of the medical staffing side of the business. And from that point, we got into home health care because, again, it was just another license to go after and another industry group to tackle. So that's kind of how I got into the business. It was fortunate enough to be the child of an entrepreneur, but that's where the start was.
So you mentioned you had siblings. How many siblings do you have?
4 brothers.
And do they also work in the business, or are you the only one?
My youngest brother does work in the business. He just started working in the business maybe like 3 or 4 months ago. Oldest brother is an MRI tech, but he's now retired. He's a military guy, so he took his military retirement and is living his life traveling the world. And then my other brother is a psychiatrist, so he's just a practicing physician.
Wow, there's 4 males, no females.
No sisters, no.
Did your mom just keep having kids hoping she'd have a daughter eventually?
That was exactly it. And she got nothing but us.
So you mentioned your mother. Is your father around?
Yeah, my father's alive. He's a respiratory therapist. So family of healthcare professionals.
Wow, that is so cool. So I want to know exactly like what steps did your mother take? Do you remember those steps that she took to start her own agency?
Absolutely, yeah. I was there from day one. So the first step, as we understood it, was to establish our entity. So this is 1996. So the internet was barely functional. So this is before LegalZoom and all the other services that exist today to set up your entity. But we went to this attorney's house. It was actually in Bayside, Queens, New York. And he was an attorney, but he also was a school teacher. And on the side, he would set up corporations. So we went to this gentleman and he set up the corporation for us. After that, it was stealing the contract from my mom's job, retyping that contract out so that we had our own contract and rate sheet to propose. And we were making the proposals to her job. So the places that she worked herself, she was the assistant director of nursing at one facility, and she was also picking up per diems at others. And that's how she realized that there were a few agencies that were kind of in all of these facilities. And she had my aunt make the initial outreach to propose our services using, this Frankenstein contract that we had. And those were our initial steps. So it was a very different time because you didn't have anyone to give you any guidance on how to do things. So that was kind of the methodology that we used at that time.
Wow. For your mother to take all these steps, your family, father, mother, but that takes a lot of guts for someone who has no idea how all of that works. Because part of the reason why a lot of people remain W-2 employees is because their fear of the unknown. They don't know what they don't know, right? So because of that, they don't even want to take the step towards figuring it out. And that's what my experience has been with a lot of people, at least, is that they want to remain as an employee because they're just so afraid that they'll make a mistake. And they're afraid that if they make that mistake, they won't know how to come out of that mistake. But what people don't realize is that the most renowned business owners, those business owners that are billionaires out there, made several mistakes along the way, and they had to make those mistakes in order to get to where they are. So another thing I'd like to know, though, is your mom reached out to this attorney who was also a school teacher, and he helped her craft this contract.
Let me just walk you back a little bit because there's a few gaps there.
Okay.
So the attorney that we worked with was the attorney that filed our corporation. The contracts that we started to negotiate with was a retyped contract that my mother swiped from one of her jobs. So they had a staffing contract with another agency, and she actually saw the contract and saw the rates. And that's when she was like, and she saw an invoice and she was like, oh, wow, this is how much these agencies are making. I can do the same. I'll put together all my nurse friends, my classmates, etc., and I'll put them to work and I'll make the money. So the contract was me physically retyping the contract that she got from her job from another agency. And then my aunt circulated and reached out to the facilities. It was skilled nursing facilities that my mom already knew was using agencies because she worked there. And she was the face of the company in the beginning. So it didn't come off as my mother pitching the companies that she works at.
I see.
Two of the contracts that she got after we settled some of our other contracts, they knew her and they still went forward with it anyway. But the initial was kind of the front of the aunt and us backdooring into that facility.
I see. So this is purely just a staffing business where you will get, nurses or LPNs or
RNs,
CNAs?
LPNs, CNAs in skilled nursing facilities.
Oh, so it's primarily skilled nursing facilities. Have you guys ever tried or thought about going into the acute care facilities?
Yes. So I was telling you from the beginning. So in the beginning, it was skilled nursing facilities. And then we started moving into acute care and then into home health care. So a nursing agency or medical staffing firm is definitely different than a home care agency because in a medical staffing firm, you are hiring and licensing staff out to providers, right, that are already licensed. So hospitals, nursing homes, ALFs, other home care agencies. And you're not responsible for anything other than managing the employees, kind of the financial responsibilities and some of the compliance associated with their profile or personnel record. With a home care agency, you're actually responsible for that patient's life. So you are the case manager, the staffing component, and all the other things that you're doing staffing as a medical staffing company. But now that patient's responsibility is your burden. So their treatment plans, their care plans, the supervision of staff, maintaining your licensure with the state, your accreditation, all gets kind of bundled in. So the way that I tend to talk to people who are looking to enter this business is that medical staffing is a good stepping stone because it gives you the exposure to the human resource side of things and kind of your first taste at actually managing a business with employees. And then I tell people to transition to home healthcare because that's the path that we were on, because you have to have those fundamentals down to manage your personal care workers, your home health aides, your nurses that are doing visits. All of that has to still be done, plus the patient care that you're responsible for. So I think it's an easier lift to get into medical staffing, and that's a good foundation to then move into home health care or even owning skilled nursing facilities, because that human resource element is going to be there regardless when you do provide care on a licensed basis.
That makes total sense. Okay, so let's say a nurse were to come to you and ask you to give them the steps that they need to take in today's age, where they have no knowledge whatsoever in like how the staffing agency model works. And let's say they know how to get their license, like they can just go out there to the county clerk's office and get licensed, or they can get an attorney to help them draft the articles of incorporation, but they don't know how to reach out to nurses and LPNs and CNAs. How do they go about finding these staff members that they need to place in the facilities?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because we ended up starting a consulting company called Passive Workforce, which helps nurse entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs get into the space. So this is a common question, and it was such a frequent question that we built a consulting company out of that, right? Because I kept getting asked the same sort of thing, like how do you get started? How do you go from concept to landing your first contract or concept to employing your first person? And what we tell our clients is it's always the same thing. Start with your core immediate circle. These are going to be your coworkers, your classmates, members in your family that are healthcare professionals. Usually, especially as a nurse, you tend to have a nurse mom, a nurse cousin, friends that you made along the way. That core group should be your first hires because they're the ones that are going to be the most flexible and trusting of you. You don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money on recruiting and paying for ads on Indeed or anything like that. Go to your initial circle first. Get them to buy into you because they're going to be more forgiving of the mistakes that you make. They're going to be more forgiving of the delays in payroll because you're going to be getting paid on a net 30 or net 60-day cycle. So if they're just picking up a shift a week for you and they're working a full-time job elsewhere and they're your friend, they're going to be willing to get paid a month later or 3 weeks later when you get paid, right? So I always tell people to kind of start out with people that they know because that's where they can make the mistakes and be forgiven, right? And then after that, you start to, the next tranche of people that you start to recruit end up being the people that your staff comes in contact with, the other nurses and the other healthcare professionals at the facility, because they'll say, oh, what agency are you with? The agency nurses swap information, recruit each other, etc. So you'll start to get people inbound at that point. But if you're going to start to spend money and kind of put yourself out there publicly, then obviously the job boards, Facebook groups, starting to post ads in reputable locations, you're going to get leads there as well. And the thing about those people who are going to be responding to those ads is that they're actively looking for work, especially on the job boards, right? People don't go to job boards to read. They go there to find work. Yeah. Unlike posting an ad on the Meta platform where people are casually coming across your ad, but not actively looking for what you're providing. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how it progresses from the start to kind of a more scaled up operational company where you're now starting to have recruiters that work for you or a more defined recruitment strategy.
Mm. So let's say you have found the staff. Let's say you have your friends, family members, you have previous colleagues and even classmates that you've contacted and they're willing to work for you. What is the next step? You've already found them, but like, how do you reach out to these hospitals? How do you reach out to the facilities? Do you pitch to them somehow, or do you have somebody doing the pitching for you? Like, how does that work?
So typically it's going to start either with relationships or cold, right? You're either going to come in with an established relationship or you're coming in cold. So again, since the audience that's most likely listening to this are healthcare professionals, most of you already work in a facility that is open to or already they are using agencies to fill their vacancies. You could speak to someone in the human resource department to start kind of inquiring as to what would be the process there. You can speak to your nursing directors, nursing supervisors. Again, can to find out who are the decision makers in that particular facility and kind of beg them for an audience to pitch. You're going to get more throughput when you're starting internally because those people already know you. So they're going to at least be willing to hear you out. When you come in cold, you're just another voice on the phone, another email to delete. So when you're coming in cold, you kind of have to go at it with the volume game. But it's as simple as putting together a rate sheet and a simple proposal as to what you offer. So your rate sheet will say, well, this is how much you charge per shift, per unit, according to the classification or credentials of the worker. And that's enough to start having a conversation as to what you could provide, because that's what most of the facilities care about. Who do you have? How much does it cost? Once you have a decision maker on the hook to have that conversation with you, you could have that via Zoom, you could have that in person, you could have it entirely over the phone and convert that into a contract. Because the thing that they're looking for is, do you have the people to fill in the vacancies that we currently have, and what is this going to cost us? But to go from, you have your, let's just say your core group of 6, maybe 2 RNs, 2 LPNs, 2 CNAs that you're going to start marketing and promoting. Once you have that, just have a rate sheet ready to present and have a conversation around that. That's where it's always going to go.
Oh, man, I love that. So this is so powerful because there's a lot of nurses that have watched our YouTube videos who have been wanting to start a staffing agency, but they just don't know how to go about it. Now, let's say you found the hospital or the facility that is looking to hire agency nurses or agency CNAs, and you are able to provide them those services. They've agreed to your contract. How does that payment process work? How is the fee collected, and is it distributed to your staff?
Okay, so that's usually going to be defined in the contract. And it's usually on a net 30-day or net 60-day cycle, meaning you're going to get paid 30 days to 60 days after you submit your invoice to the facility. So as you're going through the onboarding process with said facility, they've signed off on the contract, they're interested in working with you. One of the things that we tell our clients is that you should have a post-contract signing sort of briefing. Accounts payables, who are the people, what's required to be submitted for a complete invoice? Do they want an invoice? Do they want it faxed in, mailed in? Does it have to be signed off by a nursing supervisor or director? Should it include physical timesheets? Should it include sign-offs? What do I have to present to who in order to get paid? And in your contract, your terms are going to be defined that it's going to be 15 days, 30 days, 60 days after invoice submission. So once you know where you're going to be sending your invoice and what are the payment terms, that's usually how you're going to get reimbursed. The cool thing is that a lot of organizations have sloppy accounting practices. So even though a contract may be net 30 or net 60, some organizations have rules where they pay out invoices every Friday. And if they do that, you may be getting paid within a week of submitting your invoice. But if they were to follow the net 30 guidelines of the contract, then you would actually get paid 30 days after you issued your invoice. So if you provided services for a week, the first week of June, and you submitted that, on June 8th, let's just say, you would essentially get paid July 8th or July 8th plus a few days because of mailing of check or processing or whatever. But they, according to the contract, can pay you 30 days after receiving your invoice. However, if you're submitting those invoices weekly, then after that first 30 days, then you'll be getting paid every week from that point. So agency owners need to account for is that gap between when services were provided, when they pay their employees, and when they actually get reimbursed. And they're going to have to manage that either with cash reserves, a line of credit, or specialized lenders that kind of fill the gap for you. Obviously cash doesn't have any cost, line of credit has its cost, specialized lenders have probably the highest cost.
How much have you seen has been the typical costs that new agency owners incur within the first 3 to 6 months of doing business?
I would say first 3 to 6, about $30,000.
Okay.
For us, when we set up an agency, their total cost between consulting fees and all the other fees that they have to pay for licensing, insurance, etc., ranges around $20,000. And then if we're talking about 3 to 6 months, are they carrying rent? Are they carrying phone services, their domain? Do they have any staff, any VAs? So I would say about budget around $20,000 to $30,000 to get started.
Do you guys, as a consulting firm, do you help wannabe agency owners start agency businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. We help medical staff staffing agencies, and we are going to start assisting with home care agencies. We have turnkey services where we do everything for you, from setting up your entity, branding, which is your logo design, your brochures, your business cards. We get those printed for you as well. We do your policy and procedures, your employee manual. We do get all your insurance requirements met, all your licensing requirements met, and then you also get one-on-one training time as well as our online course. For those who don't want that turnkey service and want to kind of do it self-directed, we have a self-directed online program where all those things that I mentioned, you have to do them yourself, just following our steps. We also provide a sample contract, rate sheet calculator tool so that you can kind of estimate what your billing rate should be, what your pay rate should be. So those tools that help you make those decisions as well are included. So we help different types of entrepreneurs get started in that space. And we're going to start doing the same, I think, by the end of the summer for home care agencies.
Wow. I love your business model, man. This is like goals right there. I get so many nurses who are like, hey, have you ever interviewed a nurse or somebody who's in the staffing agency industry? And this is the first time. And all of this is brand new to me to hear all of this. So let's say somebody wants to go to your website or reach out to you to get the consulting services. In addition to the $30,000 that they typically spend, does that include the consulting services fees?
Yeah, that would include the fees. Mm-hmm.
Wow. There's nurses that I know who have spent that much on more than that on building a pool in their house when they don't even need it, right? But you can invest your money on something like this and quadruple 10x your income if you invest like this. Oh, now another thing I want to ask is, what is the typical return for an agency owner that you've seen after the first or second year?
Really depends. And it all depends on the entrepreneur themselves. So in my opinion, the worst that should happen to a healthcare professional that decides to start this business is that they contract themselves. And if they contract themselves, they're usually going to be able to earn about 50% more than they would if they were just working for another agency. Because the rule of thumb is that your bill rate should be about 1.5 times the average pay rate that you're going to be paying your staff. So let's just use the number $100 an hour. If you're expecting to pay your RNs $100 an hour, then you should be billing that facility $150 an hour. Why? About 20% of that is going to be your employment cost. So that's your FICA, FUTA, all the tax contributions that you need to make as an employer, your workers' comp, etc. Right? So you're going to have payroll burden baked into that. So that leaves you with about $30 an hour or about 30% true cash flow for you. If you are the nurse who contracts yourself, then you're going to pay yourself $150 an hour, right? So at minimum, you should be able to benefit in that way. But what I see happen with a lot of professionals who get into the space is that they kind of underestimate the work that they have to do as an entrepreneur. For some reason, believe that because I open my nursing agency and I know that there's a shortage, it's going to be a cakewalk and I'm going to make a bunch of money right out the gate. People who think that way tend not to do well. And the people who are a little more diligent about going after contracts and actually putting themselves out there are the ones that can do really well. So it's hard to say what the first year expectations are because it could be zero and you go out of business because you are deathly afraid of making cold calls, or you can staff 30 nurses within the first year on a full-time basis and be netting $1.2 million a year. Okay. The different strokes for different folks is just that way.
Now, for that top of the income ladder of nurses who's making $1.2 million per year, how much of their time is actually being invested in the company on a weekly basis, would you say?
I would say probably 60 to 70 hours a week early on, just because you're going to be wearing a few hats if you're getting started and you're kind of bootstrapping things. So this is not like start the business and work 15 hours a week and you're going to make $1 million. It's definitely not that. I would say about 60 hours a week you should expect to be putting into your business, especially early on. And that's going to be the direct outreach, you also functioning as a recruiter, you going out and setting meetings, you doing all of that essential legwork until you're making enough money to start hiring your business development people, to start building out a human resource department. And even as you start to, I just want to be clear to people who are watching, an entrepreneur's life is not what you see on social media. You'll see people celebrating their successes. I don't care if you're an entertainer, if you're an attorney, if you're an entrepreneur and you make it big, people never see the journey. They only see the success. And the success is what's promoted. They don't post stories about the entrepreneur who went bankrupt in 6 months, right? They never made any money and they failed in 6 months. That's not newsworthy, right? Yeah. The story of the entrepreneur who made $1 billion and lost it all, like the WeWork organization, or the entrepreneur who started from his garage and is now Amazon, that makes the news. But they don't show you the journey. So I need to communicate to anybody who's looking to make the transition from the bedside to the boardroom to know that it's going to take you a lot of hours, probably working your job, caring for your family, and managing the business. It's not going to be an easy march to the 7-figure mark. If it were easy, there would be more of us out there. It's not going to be easy. So you're going to have to put in a lot of work to get there. But once you're making enough money to replace your wages from your job, and you're making enough money that you can now hire competent staff, even hiring the competent staff, it's you that's going to be helping to train them. So you're going to be doing your job and you're going to be transitioning your roles and responsibilities to someone new. Hopefully they're competent enough that they've come from that world. And if they have come from that world, they're going to cost you more than the green person that you're training. So you're constantly going to be investing your time into your company and into your resources. And unlike the job that you punch out of and, it's no longer your problem, that patient that's coded 3 times the night before is no longer your problem. With your business, it is going to be your problem. You're going to be thinking about it in the shower, sitting on the toilet, having dinner with your family. It's going to be the topic of your conversations. It's going to be with you in traffic. That's the sort of commitment that you're going to need to have to find success here.
Yeah, that I totally agree. That's why entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And I interviewed this nurse who started a med spa business in my area, like here where I work. And she's one of my coworkers. She actually, I believe, she still works with me. But her first year of launching the business, I remember she told me that she basically eats, sleeps, and everything is her business 24/7. There is not one day that goes by that she's not thinking about the business. And that's what happens when you're an entrepreneur. Like if you're a business owner and you want your business to succeed, you have to constantly be thinking about and working on the business. And a lot of people don't realize that. Like you said, many people just talk about their successes, which is why I try to be as transparent as possible. And I talk about, I don't know if you watch our YouTube channel, but in our YouTube channel, I always talk about how much we earned in a particular month, how much we didn't earn this month. For example, like in the month of March, my wife barely got like any shifts. There was one pay period where she got a paycheck for like $76. And we talk about that because ultimately, I don't want people to think we're living a lavish lifestyle over here just because we're making a high hourly rate. At the end of the day, what I've always said is that it's important to make sure that you're investing your money, because when things like that happen, it doesn't faze you. That doesn't matter. So the empire that you guys have built, I want to know why you guys made those decisions that allowed you to get to where you are now. Because you said you're going to have $100 million medical staffing revenue within the next 5 years. That's your goal. Mm-hmm. So you started out initially, or you and your mom and your family, with that first staffing agency. How did you progress to where you are today?
Yeah, the progression was organic. So I remember like first checks being $20,000, like, right? And, the majority of that being wages, right? So yeah, so we do about between $250,000 and $300,000 a week in billing now. But the path is kind of like a snowball, especially if you're growing a business organically. Each hire, each new contract, each new placement, each new admission on the home care side kind of adds to it. And it took us about 3 years to break the $1 million in revenue mark. And in maybe like 2014, we were doing about $4 million in revenue. And then from 2014 to 2019, we got to 11 million in revenue, or like just under 12. And from that point, we actually had, like, I was relocating from New York to Florida. So I thought it would be good to sell the company. And that's kind of what put me on the current trajectory that I'm on now. In looking to sell the company, we spoke with a publicly traded home care agency. We spoke with a few PE groups. And that's where I actually learned that the way that we had been growing our organization organically all along, reinvesting our capital into marketing, reinvesting investing our capital into staff was wrong. Not necessarily wrong, but was probably the slowest way to grow a company. And what I learned is that the publicly traded companies and the private equity groups, they grow through acquisition. And in talking to the people that were leading the acquisition teams, I realized that none of them really understood the industry. They understood the revenue, the bottom line, what multiple they should be paying, the negotiations, but they didn't actually understand the business. And I felt that I could get more value out of other agencies if I were to acquire them with the same philosophy, but knowing the business. So I set out to create the company that we have now, which is growing through acquisition. So I still maintain a relationship with the family side of the business, just from a kind of board member perspective. But the other agencies are all agencies that we've acquired or have done some add-ons through acquiring just assets. So we're now looking to kind of ramp that up, trying to average about $25 to $50 million of acquisitions a year.
Wow. And which type of companies are you looking to acquire?
Home care agencies.
Oh. At this point, it's strictly home care agencies that you guys want to acquire.
Yeah, because the issue with medical staffing or looking at medical staffing companies today is that when you're acquiring a business, you're usually looking at the previous 3 to 5 years of performance because you want to see that are they stabilized? Are they growing? Have they had kind of up and down years? And what are the reasons for that? And a lot of staffing agencies that are looking to sell now are selling kind of inflated companies that have COVID numbers. So that bubble of time in the staffing, like we've been in the business since 1996. COVID was an anomaly period. And that you can't factor in because, as you mentioned earlier, there's been a regression back to the mean and even like an over regression to a certain extent because facilities have overspent and they're trying to get their budgets back under control. So they're trying to cut back on agency staff while boosting their kind of own nursing pools within their facilities or hiring direct. So we're not looking at acquiring not acquiring existing staffing agencies because we have to wait for that market to stabilize again and not make our acquiring decisions based upon inflated numbers from COVID.
Mm-hmm. I see. So you mentioned that you guys typically look at like the last 3 to 5 years of performance. What other kind of key factors allow you to make a decision when you acquire a company?
Yeah. So the management that they have in place, management and systems, overlapping territory, sometimes diversification in services. Those are probably significant. Similar software systems being used, whether or not there is the potential to add value by cutting redundancies. For example, the agency that we have under contract now, they are outsourcing their billing. And that's about $150,000 a year. Our billing team will just take on that responsibility without adding any new resources. So that's $150,000 to the bottom line added. And to enterprise value, that's about $650,000 or $750,000 of added enterprise value by just removing that billing expense on a 5-time multiple. So you look for things like that. Also, we have an agency in the same territory in New York City. This agency focuses on skilled pediatrics, while our other agencies focus on personal long-term care. So having the same territory and overlap, we could consolidate offices, we could consolidate staff, and we're diversifying our patient base. So those are the sort of things that we would look for. Do they have good management in place that can stay with the company, that has relationships with referral sources, that has relationships with the patients? That also helps. Do we have the same payers? So at times, if you are buying an agency, and there's 2 things that could happen. They may have a contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield that you don't have because Blue Cross Blue Shield's network has been closed for 3 years. And now, because of that, you've been declining a bunch of Blue Cross Blue Shield referrals because you're not a network. So you've already established this physician referral base that does produce Blue Cross Blue Shield referrals that you're turning down 20% more business because you don't have that same payer. So sometimes you would acquire for payers, sometimes you would acquire for geography expansion. So you may, like New York is a state that has restricted issuing new licenses in New York City. So if you were an upstate New York agency that wanted access to New York City, you might gain access through acquiring that territory.
Wow. And how do you come up with the funding? Is it personal funding funding that you're using to acquire these companies, or do you work with other investors?
Oh, you work with other investors, you work with banks. You have to constantly be raising capital. So when you're buying a company, it's typically structured where there's a certain portion that's equity, which is cash. There's another portion that's usually debt. And then there's kind of like a seller rollover or seller financing in place, right? So a deal could be only one of those things, all cash, almost never all debt, and almost never all seller rollover or seller financing. It's usually a blend of the three. So you might be in for 10 to 30% cash. Think of it like a house, right? So you might be in it from 10 to 30% cash for your deposit, the rest from the mortgage company. And, in real estate, you really don't typically have seller's notes, but in theory you can. So it's usually a combination of the three. So if you were looking at like a $10 million acquisition, you would need about $3 million in cash, probably $5 million in debt, and you'll probably leave like another 2 in a seller's rollover or seller's financing of some kind.
Wow. And at the moment, you said you guys are generating about $22 million annual revenue?
No, we're generating between 12 and 13, at least that's the pace that we're on right now. And if and when we close on the current agency that we're looking at, that'll take us to 22.
Okay. And how much of that goes towards, your staffing and operational costs?
So on the medical staffing side, it's between 22 and 30% net margins. On the home care side, especially for the Medicaid populations, around 11%. So for us, it's roughly 15% net.
Okay, so then my question is, if you're getting about 22% from the medical staffing agencies and you're getting about 11% from the home care agencies, why are you transitioning from medical staffing to home care?
So with home care, the thing that's nice is that it's stable recurring revenue. So our average patient right now receives 47 hours of services across our patient census, and they're with us for about 3 years. Mm-hmm. So even though the margins is smaller, the lifetime value of that client is longer. On the medical staffing side, you're constantly churning out, depending on the facility's needs, you're churning out on the employees who are switching up their contracts. So they're not as sticky as the long-term care clients. So for me, the trade-off is accumulate and reap the benefits kind of through volume more so than on the medical staffing side. And also on the medical staffing side, one true constriction point is the amount of professionals, right? We're all fishing from the same pool of staff. So it's whoever has the best attraction style and retention style that kind of gets ahead, but you're still going to be experiencing that churn.
You know who you remind me of? You're like the Alex Hormozi of the medical staffing world. Do you know who Alex Hormozi is?
I know who Alex is. And with smaller muscles too.
Yes. Because he didn't really start making bank until he started acquiring other companies.
Yes, but it's just the way the industry works. Like when you're an early stage entrepreneur, most of the time you're thinking about it from a very naive perspective. Mm-hmm. If I could just make $300,000 a year, I would be set, right? That's how a lot of people think. Like if I could just make, 30 grand, 40 grand a month, I'll be set. So you build a company that aims for that. And if you don't open the door or see behind the curtain as to how companies go from making $1 million a year to making 5 to making 100 million, your world is just a small business, right? Mm-hmm. So at some point, the founder has to have the ambition for more and also see behind the curtain. And once that happens, the natural progression is to kind of go about it more in an institutional fashion, right? Because just look at the startups that bootstrap and are self-funded and the startups that go after VC funding, right? Their growth trajectories are going to be completely different, mainly because they're following completely different models for growth. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to kind of more mature businesses that aren't venture-backed, the strategy is plain and simple. Reinvest your cash flow into the business and grow through acquisition and consolidation. That's just what happens next. So whether you're running gyms or home care agencies, or one recent company that got funded from a private equity group that we work with was a pool servicing company. Right? Or pest control, right? You can only fumigate so many homes. And if you go into a new state and you start with the same strategy, it took you 10 years to get to $5 million in revenue. Do you have another 10 years to do that in Georgia now? No, you're going to have to deploy some different strategy. And the fastest is to acquire.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have a family? Do you have kids? Do you have a wife?
Yeah, I have a wife and 2 children.
Oh, okay. How old are they?
5. Well, 5 and 3 now.
You just almost forgot how old your kids were.
Yeah, it's because one just turned 5 in March and the other one turned 3 last week.
I was going to say typical man, because I have to like run the numbers in my head and figure out when my son was born sometimes to see how old he is. So do you currently live in New York City, or do you live in another borough?
I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
What? But your business is in New York.
Yeah.
That is cool. That is cool. Why did you decide to live in Florida?
Weather and taxes.
I knew you were going to say taxes. But yeah, weather too, for sure. Okay, so if I have, viewers that are interested in starting an agency, a staffing agency, or they want to get some consultation from you, because you are extremely knowledgeable. I love what you do. And I'm sure there's going to be nurses that are going to want to reach out to you. How do they go about that?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out to us is just to go to www.passiveworkforce.com. That is the domain for our consulting side of the business. There, you'll get in contact with one of the members of our team that can walk you through exactly how we could assist you. Plenty of information online. We also have a YouTube channel that's Passive Workforce, same name, where we are constantly putting out content on how to go about starting, growing, and eventually exiting one of these sort of businesses. There's plenty of free content. Then there's more concierge services that we provide. And again, like I said, that business evolved out of people asking me questions as to how I did it myself. So I get involved more on the consulting side. We have like a monthly group mentoring session as well. I get involved there. But the senior consultants and junior consultants in that company take care of everything when it comes to those clients. So they're competent, they're amazing to work with, and you get me involved once you're starting to transition, because again, the majority of my time is spent kind of building out the business that I have.
If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you watch this video here where I speak with a nurse who generates $1 million per month selling NCLEX preparation courses. Oh, and don't forget to let us know if you want to have Karl back on the show to talk about his real estate portfolio.